chapter 9 and 10. It had been decided that we would go to Lome, Togo. Even though there had been some unrest in the city, everything had seemed to calm down, and it should be safe for us to go. There was a Bible school in Lome called West Africa School of Theology. They were really needing Billy's help in the business office. So we made reservations to leave Nairobi and fly to Lome, Togo. But first, we went shopping in Nairobi. We didn't buy very much because we didn't know what we would be needing or how long we would be in Lome before we would be able to return to Zaire. Even though things were still pretty bad in Zaire, we just couldn't give up hopes of ever going back there. On Friday, October the 11th, 1991, we flew to Lome, Togo. Until we could find a place to live, they allowed us to stay in another missionary's home that was on furlough. They would be returning, though, in December that year. We had no idea how long we would be in Lome, but we were together. The house was fully furnished, and we could make do without until something more permanent was decided. Billy started right away working in the business office. Jenny was doing schoolwork by correspondence because there was no school for her in the city. However, there was an American international school for Jason. It only went to 8th grade. Jason's school sessions were only in the mornings, but he would come home every day with about 2 hours of homework. It had been decided that I would help out when needed in the library of the Bible College and also be hostess to visitors and visiting teachers who would come to the Bible school. Nothing was going as planned for this term. We were in a different country, the children were in different schools, and our idea of what God had called us to do had all changed. We felt unsettled, in limbo, but we had to believe that God was still with us, leading and guiding, and that we would one day know His purpose for everything that had happened. While we were in Lome, Togo, things did not go very well. We had only been there a few weeks when problems started happening in the capital area where we lived. There was a conflict between the prime minister and the president. They began to have an all-out war between themselves, with shootings happening all around us every day. The American embassy sent warnings out to all expatriates to stay in your homes and not go into town for any reason. There was a military camp behind the Bible school compound where we lived, and we could hear shooting all the time. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks. Finally, things began to calm down. The restrictions and the curfews were lifted, and the next few pages that I read is a letter that I wrote home to my mother about what happened shortly after the restrictions to stay in our homes were lifted. Dear Mother, last night, December the 13th, 1991, we decided to go to our favorite restaurant and get a hamburger. We asked another couple to go with us, Bill and Peggy Lastly, and so they followed us in their car. It had been several weeks since any of us had been out at night because of the problems that had been going on, and there had been curfews out. During the actual crisis, the curfew was set for 6 p.m., but then it changed to 7, and then finally 10 p.m. We felt it would be safe enough to be out for an hour or so, and besides, others had been going out, and we had not heard of anyone having any problems. After we had eaten, we started back home. We were following Bill and Peggy, and we had only gone a short distance from the restaurant when all of a sudden, Bill Lastly slammed on his brakes and stopped right in front of us. Our brakes screeched as we came to a halt right behind him. The first thing we saw was cement blocks all across the road, blocking us from going any further. From a wall that was right beside the road, about 6 guys came climbing over it, and they rushed first toward the Lastly's car with big sticks and iron-looking poles. The one that turned and headed toward our car was carrying a pitchfork-looking tool, and he had it raised, and he was intending to use it. The rest of the story, I don't even know if I can explain it clear enough on paper. I was praying out loud, calling on the only source in life that I know of that is able to come to my immediate need when I need him, Jesus. Instantly, his angels surrounded our car, and at the same time, he gave wisdom to Billy and Bill Lastly on how to maneuver their cars by backing up and going over to the sidewalk where a board was laid out, but we managed to drive over it. As about 3 guys started toward the front of our car, Billy stepped on the gas like he was going to run over them, and they scattered. As we waited a second to make sure that the Lastlys got around and over that board, the guys hit their car, and one stood posed to hit Peggy's windshield, but he froze and just stood with his weapon raised. During all of this, our doors were unlocked and our windows were down. They were electric windows, and I had been pushing the button, trying to close them, but kept pushing it the wrong way. Just as we drove by, the one with his pitchfork raised, the window went up, but he never struck anyway. As Billy sped off, the Lastlys followed right behind us. Billy looked in his rearview mirror, and all the men were standing like statues in the road. Their weapons were raised, but they were not moving. I shook like a leaf, but I cried and praised God all the way home. Once again, I knew we had been shadowed by the almighty hand of God, and his protection had saved our lives. Not long after this happening, it was decided that we would go back to Kenya. The school situation was not working for our children. We had no furniture or items to start a home, and the house we were living in would soon become unavailable as the other missionaries on furlough would be returning. They would need all of their furnishings that we had been using. We had also heard that things had calmed down in Zaire, and if we were living in Kenya, it would be easier to go from there. We would put the children in boarding school at Rift Valley Academy and then try once again to go back into Zaire. But when we arrived in Kenya, we found there was a waiting list for RVA, the boarding school, and it would be best if we lived there in Kenya for a while and wait for the children to be accepted. It was decided that Billy could continue going back into Zaire by making short trips to check on the work there and the pastors. We enrolled the children into Roslyn, a school there in Nairobi, where they would take a school bus there and back each day. I started working in the library as we lived on the East Africa School of Theology compound. Once again, we were in another missionary's home that was in America on their furlough. There was a storage room of furniture that no one else wanted, including beds, dishes, towels, and linens. And since we still had nothing of our own, we were so grateful to be in a comfortable home and be able to use the things we needed. So we began the year of 1992 in Nairobi, Kenya. We felt it would only be for a short time. RVA, the boarding school, would become available for the children, and Billy and I would just go back to Zaire. Many times people would ask us if we thought of giving up and going back to America. We had been evacuated from Zaire, leaving everything we owned. We were sent to Lomé, Togo, where some of the same things were happening, like the wars, and we had to leave there. But we never once felt like giving up. We had clearly heard the call to go, so we felt that if God wanted us to go back to America, He would tell us. But we felt a peace about where we were and what we were doing. We really felt like that one day we would be able to go back to Zaire and continue the work that was started. We became very busy going to activities and sports events at Roslyn. I was working in the library, learning all new things for me about cataloging and classifying books. I loved every minute of it. This was my first job as a missionary because always before I was teaching the children, and they were my main responsibility. Billy was asked to help in the business office at East Africa School of Theology. He also did some bookkeeping for a couple of things going on at the school, and he stayed very busy with these responsibilities. And he continued with trips into Zaire, where he was also over the reporting of the finances for that area. We attended an international church there in Nairobi that was in English. And we became very close to the students that came to East from all around the region. Some were from Ethiopia, some from Uganda, and some from Tanzania. All of these students spoke English, as all subjects were taught in English. We had to work at not losing the French we had learned. I panicked when someone suggested we learn Swahili. But because we didn't speak Swahili, we didn't come to know very many of the pastors in Kenya. Therefore, we were not invited to come to preach at their churches. We were living and working in Kenya, but we were considered Central African missionaries, not East Africa missionaries, like all of the other missionaries who lived there. They did make us feel welcome, and we were invited to any and all activities going on in the East Africa field. I made friends with the ladies there that I'm still very close with today. My life was full. I loved the work in the library and being a part of the East Africa missionary ladies' life. Billy, on the other hand, began to be very dissatisfied. He tried to keep up with the field and the field books for the work in Zaire. At the same time, when he was in Kenya, he tried to keep up with all the field and the school and the financial books there. He would do whatever was asked of him by 4 different men that were over him: the Central African Area Director, the man that was over East, the Area Director for East, and the field chairman for Kenya. He tried to answer to all 4 men as he looked up to each one as our leader and advisor. We loved and respected each one. Because of all the work and all his responsibilities, and never getting to do the main thing he was called to do, which was to preach, he began to change. His personality changed. His affection toward me became cold and distant. He didn't sleep much at night, and often he would awaken me sitting up on the side of the bed crying. In fact, he cried a lot. When I would ask what was wrong, he didn't know, but one time he did tell me it was because he never got to preach anymore. He was asked to teach some courses at East, and we felt this would help, but it really only made things worse by giving him more to do than he could handle. In March, the Kenya Field held a seminar for all missionaries. There was a psychiatrist that had come to East to teach a class, and he was available to give us this seminar on how to handle stress. He passed out these self-exams for each to take. You gave yourself points for anything going on in your life, such as a death in the family, a new position, or any change in your normal routine. This could be things that had happened to you in the last 6 months, whether it was good things or bad. After we finished our exams and then totaled our points, the doctor said, if there's anyone in this room that scored over 200 points, I don't recommend you getting in your car and driving home alone. We looked down at Billy's score, and it was over 500. There was a second exam to take, but Billy turned it over and refused to take it. We drove home in silence that day, without sharing our scores with anyone. We knew something was terribly wrong, but we had no idea what to do. That evening, I talked Billy into taking his exam and showing it to the doctor. He sat and listened to all that had been happening in our lives since the evacuation about 6 months previous. And with tears streaming down Billy's face, I had to do most of the talking with the doctor. We left the doctor without answers, but just being able to talk about it made us both feel better. That night, it was another sleepless night for Billy, but about daylight, he fell asleep from total exhaustion. I let him sleep in as I got up and I got Jenny and Jason ready for school and sent them off in the school bus. As I was walking over to the school to work in the library, I met the doctor on the pathway. He showed me a letter that he had written after we left him the night before. The letter was addressed to the African Field Office in Springfield, Missouri. In the letter, he stated that he had met with Billy and I, and he was highly recommending that we go immediately to Emerge Ministries before Billy had a complete breakdown. He also advised that the whole family should go along. After I read the letter, he asked me, "Do you think that Billy will accept this?" I replied, "Billy has changed so much these last few months. I don't know if he will accept it or try to fight it." Emerge Ministries was a counseling center located in Akron, Ohio. There, qualified counselors met with missionaries, ministers, and even laymen that were experiencing depression, burnout, or problems with stress. I was surprised when I found out later that Billy agreed to go without any hesitation. It would be a month before the children were out of school and we could work out all the details of a leave of absence for at least 6 weeks. I was very concerned that Billy would not make it another month. Because the days after it was decided that we should go, he grew worse. He could not sleep at night, and he cried all the time. I continued to handle all situations at home. I worked in the library, and I made excuses for each meeting or appointment that Billy would miss. One morning, our neighbor and colleague, Marvin Gilbert, came to ask me how Billy was doing. I told him my fears that Billy might not be able to wait the month that it would be before we could leave. Marvin called me later that same morning and told me that he had taken Billy to the hospital. They had admitted him and then immediately started him on medication so that he could sleep and rest. And sleep he did for several days. We began to receive so much love and support from our colleagues in the Africa Field Office in Missouri. People would come to by the hospital to see Billy. They would find him asleep, but they would come in, pray over him, read scriptures. The Lord began to touch him and bring healing to his heart, lifting the sadness and bringing joy back to him once again. It was a very difficult time, but it was through this valley that we learned so much. We learned to pace ourselves and to not take on more work than we could do. We learned that our walk with God was much more important than the work of God. If you're not walking very close to God, the work will suffer. Billy realized he was so busy that he forgot the valuable lesson of making time for God. We did go on to Emerge Ministries and continued to learn more lessons on how to handle stress, how to stop and rest, and how to decline new jobs given to us if they were more than we could handle. We also learned that time spent with God every day was a must to be full of His strength for each task. You would think that as old as we were, we would have known how to pace ourselves, but so many unplanned things happened that made us forget. The enemy used it to try and make us quit, and he didn't stop there. Within the next few years, other blows would come that should have made us give up. But because of the strategies that we learned during this time, God would give us grace and the strength to continue. Billy's illness took up most of the year of 1993, and in 1994, we both knew God had healed him. He had to go to Bukavu, Zaire, with a medical team to help with a feeding program for refugees that were fleeing from a genocide going on in Rwanda. A cholera epidemic had broken out among the refugees, and many died while Billy was there. He saw many dead bodies lining the streets. But with God's help, he was able to work and minister to those who had survived.